Welcome back to Sledgehammer Horror, guys. I am Ken Sledge, and let's talk horror. Now, today I'm joined by the amazing Rod Gilley. Rod, how you doing today?
Oh, I'm doing fine. Yeah.
Hey, it is amazing to have you here, but before we talk about why you're here, I would like for the people that don't know you to get to know you a little bit. You are the founder and CEO of RDG Books Press, a full-service editor and author of The Hero, the Fear, and the Date, as well as There Will Never Be a Rainbow. So, how long have you been writing for?
Oh, there's actually two answers to that, but uh, I started taking it really seriously about 3 or 4 years ago.
hmm Um, yeah, go ahead.
Oh, I, I wrote as a teenager. I mean, I was writing stuff a very long time ago, and I had 5 years worth of writing uh, that a pretty girl asked to see while I went to work, and when I came back, it was all gone. So
Oh no.
5 years was stolen. I got very disheartened, kind of stepped away from it. And then many years later, I was hanging out with a writer, and that kind of inspired me to get back in it and see what I could do. And I started working on my first novel. Mhm.
Yeah. And it's one of those things where I can totally understand where all those years of work just being taken right away from you, that could actually, I could see how it could actually, completely devastate you to the point to where you don't want to do it anymore. That's 5 years of my life just down the drain.
Yeah, because that was many years ago. I didn't even have a typewriter, that was all handwritten. And so when it was stolen, I had no backups. I had a bunch of notebook paper and it was just
Right.
all gone, completely erased.
Yeah, that's terrible, man. I'm sorry. But you are just a guy from Kentucky that believes, if you have a dream, believe in yourself and go for it. So, on top of being, a self-service editor and author, you promote other books as well, correct?
Yes, let's see, I publish my own books. I publish books for other authors. And then I'm big on Twitter, but I'm across the board on all the platforms.
Mhm.
But I'm mostly on Twitter, and I try to promote all of those writers that I know and, help them as much as I can. When I really got into writing, I was alone. I didn't have anybody. So
Sure.
now that I kind of know what I'm doing, I try to help all the writers that I can, you know.
And you mentioned Twitter a little bit, but you also said you're very active on all social media. And the best thing about that is you guys don't have to go far to find him or his work because I have all those links right down in the description, guys. So make sure you're clicking those links, following Rod on all his social media pages. Make sure you're checking out his work. I promise you that you're not gonna regret it. So, in order for you to be a writer that writes about horror and writing about all genres, really, but especially in the case of horror, horror had to start for you somewhere, Rod. So now I would like to go back to the past and talk about what got you started in the horror genre, your first horror movie. And Rod, the first horror movie you watched was?
The 1931 Dracula starring Bela Lugosi. I did, childhood is many years behind me, but the best I can remember, I was probably around 10 years old. And I had the good fortune recently on YouTube. They had a copy of the entire movie and it was
Hmm.
free. So I watched it again recently. Still love it. That movie
Yes.
grabbed me as a child and as a grown man.
Well, anything Bella does, I think, is just absolutely phenomenal. Lugosi, one of the true godfathers of horror. And we know that, you were a young man when you watched it for the first time. And I can definitely see why Dracula would have such an impact on you, especially at such a young age. But do you remember who you were watching it with the first time you had seen it?
I think it was a family thing, mom and siblings. I can't swear to that, but that's the best I could say. I wouldn't have any other access, I don't think. Back then you had one TV in the living room, you know,
Right.
and if it worked, you were doing well.
Right. If you didn't have to hit it to get the static to
Yeah,
function, you were looking
yeah,
good.
or even worse, you were the antenna, you know?
Right. All right, we need more aluminum foil, guys. Got to put it
Yeah.
on the bunny ears. Um, so, like I said, this movie is to this day still so relevant. I mean, we just had the
Oh,
new Nosferatu last year, the Eggers film, which obviously wouldn't exist
yeah.
without the Dracula books, which led to the Dracula film.
Uh-huh.
in 1931. So, what would you say the most impactful scene for you from Dracula was?
Well, my immediate first memory, the thing that comes to mind immediately when I think of that movie, and it's become a pretty common trait in shows thereafter, is, Bela Lugosi had incredible features to begin with. And so he's got these awesome freaked out eyes, right? So, we're talking about 1931. Special effects meant somebody was standing off camera with a cigar and blowing some smoke in front of the lens, right? Yeah. And but they did this awesome thing where, a close up on Bela Lugosi, shadowed at the top, shadowed at the bottom, with his eyes lit with the light shining toward his face, and then they would shadow the rest. You'd see that effect in the original Star Trek. They did it with William Shatner a lot, you know,
Mhm.
focusing on those eyes. And with Bela Lugosi, that was a cool thing to focus on, And immediately that image pops in mind if I think about Dracula at all. That'll always be my first thought. Dracula, that's him, you
Yeah.
know.
Well, I think that's like that for a lot of us. The first iteration that we see of it is our version of that said character. It doesn't matter if it's Dracula, Frankenstein, whatever have you. Our first, iteration is the one that we stick by. And so for me, I think that Bela Lugosi will always be Dracula. That was the first Dracula that I had ever seen. Growing up a big Universal monster fan. So we know which scene affected you the most, Rod. But what would you say your favorite scene from Dracula would be?
That's a little tougher because there's several. Bela Lugosi, as far as I know, the best I can tell watching the movie, wasn't a very big man, relatively small fellow, and but he had massive hands. If you really look at it, his hands are big, and I love the way he stalked. You know, like when he goes to get little Mina, he's stalking up to her with his big old hands, and he's getting closer and closer, and it's graphic. It grabs you. It's very
Oh
intense.
yeah.
And back then they didn't rely on CGI and special effects and the ridiculous amount of gore that is considered to be horror now. Getting sick to your stomach is not the same thing as a good horror experience.
Mhm.
In that old 1931 movie, approaching the castle, being in the castle, virtually every scene, the atmosphere was incredibly good, especially for that time period. But I mean, it really was excellent atmosphere. And then one other thing I've got to mention is the character who played Renfield. If you are familiar with the movie, he Dwight something, I can't think of his last name, shoot. But that actor did an incredible job of playing a
Oh
complete
yeah.
lunatic. He came off as the ultimate lunatic. He had it in the eyes, he had it in the laugh, he had it in everything he did. And he kind of stole the show a little bit, you know?
Mhm. Well, when you're watching it for the first time, especially, you're like, what a buffoon. But the more you go, you're just like, wow, this guy, he
Uh-huh.
he's got it. He's nailing it.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. He played a lunatic perfectly.
Mhm. Well, and we've had so many different iterations of Dracula and so many different versions of this movie told, but what would you say your favorite version of Dracula would be?
Boy, again, I've seen virtually all of them. I'd have to go with Bram Stoker's Dracula with what was it? Gary Oldman? Is that his name?
Yep, Gary Oldman.
Oldman. That's it. I'm sorry. Yeah, that was a pretty cinematic, pretty awesome. Had a lot
Oh
of
yeah.
layers to it. It's Dracula, but there was a pretty good romance side to that.
Oh yeah.
And when he converts into the creature, it's a little hocus pocus, but it was all the way through. It was a solid movie. I enjoyed that one a lot.
So do I. Absolutely love it. So, um, we talk about remakes, remakes, requels, sequels. We're always talking about that. But when we're talking about Dracula, we just had the Nosferatu film, which we all know is essentially a Dracula remake. And then we had the Renfield film, the Nicolas Cage film that just came out a couple years ago. Would you like to see them try to make an attempt today at just a hard reboot of the original Dracula film?
I think I don't know. I mean, I'm 60 years old, and I've come to realize I'm not seeing the world the same way a 25-year-old would. You know, but I would love to see Dracula or virtually any scary movie I'm looking forward to seeing your movie. I hope it meets this
Thank you.
criteria. A good horror movie gives you chills, has you kind of
Hmm.
second guessing, especially if you're sitting in the dark watching it. It affects you emotionally. You know, today the idea, I think they ought to create a whole new genre. This is sick, disgusting, dirty filth. This is going to make you sick to your stomach. Okay, now over here is horror.
Right.
A good example is the scene in shoot, sorry, drawing a blank. Stephen King's best story, Pet Cemetery.
Okay.
And in there, there's a scene where he's creeping up through this kind of mushy, wet forest area in the night, and there's something there, but it's out of view. You can't see it, which that's a staple of horror. And
Yeah.
you know, I actually first time I heard that story, it was MC Hall's audiobook, and
Oh,
I literally, grown man, been around, I had goosebumps all up and down my arms, because that scene was so perfectly done. I'd like to see horror really be horror. So the
mhm.
original Dracula done up today, I hope they wouldn't change it a whole lot. I hope we wouldn't go into all these computer generated
Oh
things.
yeah.
Hire an actor that can pull off the role, get another crazy Renfield. If you change anything, and I think you might agree with this. In the 1931 Bela Lugosi Dracula, what I consider to be a super great classic, the ending was a little bit underwhelming. The ending, you know, that old dude goes off camera. You're led to believe he's going to stick Dracula with the stake. You hear a few groans. It was a little underwhelming. There could have been a little more
Yes.
to that ending.
Yeah, I think
But
that they would definitely beef the ending up nowadays. I think that would be probably priority number one. And like you said, they would also try to, bloody it up and make it as extreme as they could. But
yeah,
I think getting the ending down would be first and foremost. So,
yeah,
man, I love talking about Dracula being your first horror film and what that means to you. But here for a second, I do want to throw a little bit of a curveball at you.
that's
My
fine.
little buddy Ghostface is here, and he has a question for you. What's your favorite scary movie, Rod? What is your favorite
Oh,
horror movie of all time?
I've got to say, I have an uncut director's version of The Exorcist, and I've got to say, everyone, including me, we laugh at the pea soup thing, but by golly, that is a very well done, good scary
Oh
movie.
yeah.
And back then, again, they didn't have all this CGI; they had real people doing stunts. And I don't know if you remember it, but bending over backwards and walking across the floor is hard enough. I don't know what they call that, a crab walk or whatever, but they did it going down a flight of stairs,
Right.
and they made it creepy and scary looking. I mean, I'm really impressed with the way they did that movie. And, yes, they could have done without the pea soup, but other than that, though, that was a good scary movie.
But I'm saying like that's still like people could say what they want about that, but that's an iconic moment
Yeah,
in that film. Like that is a very iconic moment. When you have the pea soup, a lot of people, that's what they remember is the
yeah,
green vomit. Like
I
that's
think
something that really sticks home to people is
mhm.
that green vomit. So I gotta say, like, I think that they landed that. I think it's great.
Yeah.
We met Linda and she said that people come to conventions and they bring cans of pea soup for her to sign. Like so it's one of those things that it's really stood the test of time. And
Yeah,
I still think it looks great to this day. I think that I would rather that than a bunch of CGI, puke
yeah,
coming out. Like
yeah.
I think it's aged really well. I think that film has aged really well.
Oh,
And
yeah.
I still think it's one of the scariest movies ever made.
Yeah, I truly agree with you. And it's totally very likely, I would think, that pea soup scene was extremely intentional, because you're talking
Oh
about
yeah.
a very intense, very dark, and for its time, extremely graphic, scary movie. And the pea soup is probably the only giggle in the entire movie, and it's kind of a release. It's like when you're reading a horror novel. Some say, and they're wrong, horror should be nonstop, continuous tension. No,
No.
every story in any genre comes in like waves on an ocean. You've got to let a little time come in for the reader to kind of submerge, and then
Mhm.
jock them with something. And maybe that pea soup was in there for a very, very intentional reason.
Mhm. Well, I mean, it's still like I said, watching that movie, especially now. as a father of little girls compared to watching it as a child, they're two completely different, two completely different viewings. And I love the fact that that movie does that to me. It scares me as a father and it scared me as a child for two completely different opposite ends of the spectrum.
Yeah, I remember. I tell on myself a little bit. One of my fondest memories of that movie, because we didn't see it in the theater. We
Sure.
saw it at home. I don't know if mom had a VCR or if it was on television, but we watched it late at night. The only way you watch a scary movie is in the dark, you know.
Yeah.
And so here I am with my siblings, particularly my kid sister, and she's over there on the couch, wrapped around a pillow, biting that pillow. Buddy, she's really getting into it. She won't look away, but she's scared. So naturally, I couldn't have been much more than 12 years old. So naturally, when she goes upstairs to her bed and climbs in bed and goes to sleep, why her brother tosses her bed up and down. And my
Well,
sister
of
went
course.
down a whole flight of stairs without touching one. It's like, sister,
I'd actually be ashamed of you if you didn't do that.
I had to do
That's
it.
what big
I believe
brothers
I'll do it
do.
today. Yeah, I think I would do it today. I mean,
Right. Well, man, again, Rod, I've had an amazing time hanging out with you, but before I let you go, we always bounce back to the same question. We're going to go back to Dracula, and what we're going to do is rank this movie on a skull count. Now, we're not ranking it on acting, production, score, direction. We're not being critics here. All we're doing, Rod, is ranking this movie on how much it affected you on your first viewing. So, zero skulls being not effective, five being extremely effective. You can use half and quarter skulls anywhere in the middle. Rod, what would your ranking of Dracula be?
oh, definitely five skulls. It introduced me, hooked me, grabbed me, and for an entire lifetime made me love horror. Uh, it's it's fantastic. And like I said, I watched it recently, and I still think it's fantastic. Incredible movie.
And like Rod said earlier, guys, it is streaming free on YouTube. So if you've never had the pleasure of viewing this film, and I know there's this stigma around, oh, you have these old movies, they can't be good because they're old movies. I promise you, for this younger generation, the movies you love would not exist without your Universal monsters, without your Hammer horror films to influence your slashers. And it's definitely one of these things that sit down and give it a chance. I promise you. Yes, it may be in a sepia color. It may be in a black and white color. Color doesn't make a film. The script does, the acting does, and these films are so brilliant. I absolutely adore Hammer horror. I absolutely adore the Universal monsters. I know I wouldn't be the human being I am today, let alone horror fan, without the contributions of Hammer and Universal. So please, if you haven't, make sure you're checking this out. And I know I said it at the beginning, guys, but we are at the end of the third act. The credits are about to roll and the curtain's about to drop. But before that happens, I want to remind you I have all of Rod's social media links right down in the description, guys. So make sure you are giving him a follow. Make sure you're checking out the books. And I'm telling you, he just talked about it. He just recently started writing again. So this isn't the end of the era. This is the start of the era. So he has a lot more coming out for us. So make sure you're following on social media and anywhere that he is. Rod, please don't go anywhere, my friend. I got a couple more questions for you. Uh,
Okay.
Everyone else, if you haven't already, please like, comment, and subscribe. It does help build the channel more than you know. And follow Sledgehammer Horror on social media. Those links are in the description as well. But until next time, keep talking horror, stay what you are, and we'll see you guys soon.